You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway Murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
And we're joined again by Dr. Katherine Ramsland, author, professor, and forensic psychologist. Dr. Ramsland, welcome back to the podcast.
I'm glad to be here. It's a great, stimulating conversation.
Well, thank you.
We are so thrilled that you decided to join us.
So when we left off, we were talking about these fascinating weekends. You do something called Haunted Crime Scene Weekends. So what is that all about?
Well, the Haunted Crime Scene Weekend came out of a couple of books that I wrote with Mark Nesbitt, who runs the Gettysburg Ghost Tours. Used to be a park ranger at Gettysburg. He's written many Ghosts of Gettysburg books from stories that people tell him as they come off the fields. And Mark used to be a skeptic. You hear enough stories and see enough things, it changes you. But we thought, because there's this really interesting case very close to Gettysburg, this is how it all began. It was these 3 children who were killed and laid in the woods. And then, nobody knew who they were. There was no way to find out who they were. This is back in the 1930s. And close by in Altoona, there was a murder-suicide. Again, who are these people? Were they related? Some clothing turned up in a suitcase, et cetera, et cetera. So we thought, well, this would be a great kind of case to bring people in. We can take them to the sites where the children were, where their graves are, how they were related to the Altoona couple, et cetera. Because we had the story from the police museum. We had a lot of stuff from that. That's how it started. We thought, we're going to do this same scene over and over again. But it turned out the same people kept coming back to the weekend. So we had to mix it up a little bit and bring in. And so then we began to actually build crime scenes so they could look at it. And we did one that's known as The Minister and the Choir Singer out of New Jersey, where this minister and choir singer were found laid out in a lover's lane, and her tongue had been cut out.
I remember reading about this.
And that is currently an unsolved case, multiple suspects.
From approximately what era was this?
1910s-ish. I can't remember the exact year. But
quite a scandal, as I recall.
Yeah, I mean, there was a family that was tried but acquitted. The wife of the well-to-do wife of the minister and the husband of the choir singer.
I do know this one. Yeah.
So we had that, but we had multiple suspects because there was a stalker on her as well. There's a lot of really cool evidence for that. So then we thought, okay, let's have them, since it's unsolved, let's have everybody come in and do what they need to do. So my part is the forensic part. I do a forensic presentation. One time I brought the coroner with me to talk about autopsy reports and whatnot. Cool. So that's my job, here's the forensic part. Mark and Carol, his wife, and Patty, the medium, come in and teach people how to look at the scene from a different angle, because at this point we're at a dead end with traditional methods. Can we bring paranormal methods into this? And so that's what the weekend is comprised of. And we've done, so then we did the Colonial Parkway case. Wow. This past April, we took that on because, again, multiple strands to it. I think we had enough people to, each was assigned one of the couples. And that, and they had to work on that case, and then we would bring them together and then put them back apart. And, so it certainly was a long process. My job, again, is we did maps. We did, here's the evidence that we have. Here are some of we didn't give them suspect information because we want them to come to it clean. But we also knew that if they did cheat and look it up on the internet during the night or something, they were going to get they weren't going to solve it because it's not solved. So that's sort of the idea of the weekend is we're coming together. You're going to learn everything we know forensically about this case. You're going to, and I do also present cognitive errors, processing, observation. I present the forensic psychology of these cases as well. And we keep getting people coming back. We're the same people, which is fine. But we always have to think of a new case. You
need new content then, because you have a lot of the same attendees. They love this, obviously.
Yes. So what were some of the conclusions that your group of participants drew about our case? I'm really interested.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I did is I looked at data from body farms, and forgive me, I don't know the names of everybody aside from your sister, but the couple that was found with the blanket over them.
Anna Maria and Daniel.
Daniel. That's incident number 4.
At body farm information on body farms where they lay out the dead in various dispositions to study time since death, decomposition rates, bug activity, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And there was a case where they had laid out bodies in a variety of dispositions, and it was in the right climate and about the right period of time to compare to that finding. And it was very clear to me that the covering over the body on the body farm yielded enough information to know things about wounds and whatnot. And so what we have with was it the fourth couple? Were they the fourth couple?
Yeah, number 4.
What we have with the fourth couple is police saying we got nothing off like, how did you get nothing off of that? There would have been blood residue. There would have been human remains on that covering. There would have been something that would have given you information. Like if you want to say, well, because there was a nick on a hand that indicated maybe a knife was involved. Well, if someone had been stabbed in the ribs or the heart, that blanket over them would have had something on it to indicate that there was blood in that area, because the evidence from the experiment at the body farm says bodies covered for this period of time in this kind of a climate will leave residue on the covering. And so I had that experiment that I brought to the case.
Oh, wow. Right.
And I thought, how can they say there's nothing there? There's something there. Where is that covering? There's probably still something you can get off of it.
Well, some of the current investigators in the case have said to me they'd love to get a hold of the blanket again. Mm-hmm. As we understand it, by the way, that's an electric blanket from Daniel's car and the 2 bodies were laid out side by side in the woods for a period of 6 weeks. We know definitely when they disappeared and we know when they were found. And it's 6 weeks, very hot, very wet that fall. We also understand that there was animal activity, so the blanket may have been pulled off the bodies at some point by animal predators.
But they weren't off when the bodies were found.
Well,
one of them was partially covered.
One of them was partially covered.
And whatever blood would have come from wounds would have still been on it, even pulled off. And
there's also clothing as well. And, we've
Right.
seen the crime scene photos. Most people have not, but the crime scene photos were leaked by the FBI, and we've certainly seen them. It's pretty evident there are articles of clothing. I mean, the bodies clearly are badly decomposed, and you can see a skull or 2 in the photographs. It's been a while since I've looked at them. I try not to look at them. There are articles of clothing, and there is the blanket. And one of the experts had said to me fairly recently, I'd love to get a hold of that blanket and go back over it using MVAC technology, for example. Yeah. And, we know the folks at MVAC, and they would love to help in any way that they could.
There would be something. I believe there would be something.
But it's very difficult to get a straight answer out of, in this case, the Virginia State Police and the FBI about what the status is of advanced forensic testing. I think sometimes when they say we don't have anything, I think they're reflecting we don't have anything by the standards of 1989. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that phrase, we don't have anything, is operative in 2022.
Correct. So that was one of the things that at least I brought to it. There was some psychic impressions that the missing couple were buried in a specific location, not close to the parkway at all.
Right.
But again, that's a psychic saying it. You'd have to go to the site and do some digging, take it a cadaver dog. If I believed that information was good for any particular reason, then I would take a human remains specialist dog to the scene to see if there was anything to be found.
Even though you're usually the skeptic when it comes to the psychic
I'm an open skeptic. I'm not a closed skeptic. I want there to be ghosts out there telling us stuff. Are you kidding? The world would be an amazing place if that were true.
Yeah.
Well, you never know.
I actually, just Hollywood, they brought me in to pitch a show about this kind of idea of using paranormal techniques alongside forensic techniques. And they were so excited. This is going to be a great show because the ghosts solve it, right? At the end,
Well, maybe the ghost could guide the forensic psychologists and experts, crime scene analysts.
This isn't medium. This is real life. So in 5 minutes, my pitch meeting was over.
Oh, well.
Wow.
Did they want the ghost to solve the cases?
The idea is that if you separate people out in different rooms, you give them different types of paranormal methods, and they come up with similar stuff, although they're not talking to one another. But they come up, that's interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Doesn't necessarily mean anything, but it's interesting. If you're working with a medium who has, in fact, had some success working with police, that's somebody you could listen to. However, sometimes they overstate what they actually were able to do. But I've talked to cops who say they have worked with mediums and it has been helpful. I have talked to cops who've said that. So I'm open. I want something like that to happen. Definitely.
And we have had people in recent years approach us, not the least of which is our oddball, to which we were referring earlier. But we have had people approach us and say, hey, I think you should have a psychic come in, or I have talked to a psychic. I know that originally Dorothy Allison, who was used by quite a number of police agencies, was actually brought in to do some consulting work. And I would say that Bill and I definitely belong in the hard skeptic category as well when it comes to psychics. And we addressed this actually recently in our episodes about tips. When we send a tip to the FBI, we told our listeners it can't start or end with psychics because you can't prove it. There is no way to prove it one way or the other. But
well, you can. You can corroborate. If they say buried here, you dig.
And find a body or whatever. Right.
Oh, true enough, yeah.
But that's my problem with the psychics that I've worked with is they get you right up to, he's telling me, he's telling me about the location. Oh, he's gone now.
And he's gone now. Yeah, okay. I gotcha.
That's the problem. Well, then why do you waste all the time telling you all that? Why didn't you just give me the location? If you only had so much energy to say something, why didn't he say the main thing instead of wasting our time leading up to the main thing and then disappearing? And there's Annie's voice right there. That's what she said all the time. I hate this thing because they get me going and then they're out. Inconveniently, they just happen to run out of steam. So I see that a lot. And I definitely see psychics getting involved in cases contradicting one another, using up resources that may lead nowhere. But here and there, little tiny things happen that make me think, okay, I'm at least going to stay open. Now, I call myself a ghost repellent because they're never there when I'm there.
Right. They sense your skepticism, Dr. Ramsland.
Yeah. Well, I was just on a car ferry and I had my own little cabin. It was going across Lake Michigan 4 hours and the haunted cabin was right next door. How hard is it for the ghost to walk through the wall and say hello? Honestly.
And to say, I understand you're a skeptic.
I'm willing to listen because there have been some weird things. And I'll tell you an example, and I'll probably say this one in Savannah. There was a case where a woman was murdered raped and murdered and stuffed in a closet in this building. The guy who was a janitor who sort of ran the janitorial staff in the building was in there one day when he was shining a black top table, and he saw an image in the table, and he looked up and this ghost was pointing to the table. And he remembered that one of his staff at the time was a guy who always wore a black shirt. And so he told police this. It turns out that's the guy who raped and killed her. And that got into court.
Wow.
So
Was the perpetrator, the offender, found guilty?
yeah. Yes, he was.
Based on additional information that they were able to obtain?
Based on additional information. But the start of it was supposedly a ghost telling the guy. And he was allowed to say it in court.
Wow.
It's Canada.
Interesting.
But, hey,
Wow. Well, it's Canada. Anything goes up there.
And there have been some in the States. There have been dreams. There have been... I love remote viewing. I don't think of that as paranormal, but I think remote viewing that the U.S. Army used for decades is very interesting.
Can you explain? I don't know what that means.
Remote viewing is the idea of being able to somehow connect with, I don't know, some psychic plane where you can see, you send out a person and what's called an outbounder. That person goes to a site where they can look at a building or they look at something that's distinct. And the remote viewer can draw it, and then you can corroborate. Is this what you saw?
Oh, wow.
Some of the art is unbelievably specific. They have found fugitives that way. They have found murder victims that way. There are stories that's what keeps me in the game, folks. There are stories that has worked.
Remote viewing.
So the U.S. Army used it from, I can't remember the exact years, but if you're interested, there's a book called, I think, Phenomenon, that documents the entire program where they used these people to find things like drug imports.
Wow.
Once a guy was taken hostage in another country. He was a high-ranking officer. They found him. So there are a lot of interesting applications, but it is filled with oddball characters, too. There's no doubt about that.
How exactly is this supposed to work? How is this supposed to work? These two, the person at the remote location and the person here,
right?
Do they? Are we saying they have a connection?
Yes,
a psychic, if you will,
somehow
connection.
They do.
Do these people know each other? I mean, are they?
They might, but they don't have to. But the person who, in the experiments, the outbounder would not say where he or she was going.
Right.
They would just be at the site. The reviewers would draw what was the impressions coming to them, and some were very accurate.
And is this happening in real time?
Yes. Yeah.
So the outbounder is at a remote location, and let's say it's 4:00 in the afternoon. So it's also at the same time in a different, distant location. Another person who's receiving this information is able to accurately convey what the other person in another state or country. Or whatever is seeing.
Yes.
Almost like they're connected telepathically.
That's what it seems like. I don't think of that as paranormal, but you should read the Army experiments. They're amazing.
Jeez.
And then they had to shut it down because taxpayers didn't want them putting money into psychics. They were called psychic spies. Some journalists came in and dismissed the whole thing, and then they had to shut it down. Or maybe they didn't, who knows. But they ran it for several decades, and they had some very, very talented remote viewers. But there have been some people who just go, first-timers can do it. They don't need training.
Remote viewing. And this is across space, but not time.
Yes, I think.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Wow.
Could it be done? Do you know? Notice how I'm drilling down here. I'm really curious about this. Could it be done at a later time as well? Do we know?
Well, there was a time where they actually saw one of them, and a couple of them were psychically talented, and one of them saw into the future, something that
Now we're talking.
There was one story, and I tell this in my novel because Annie does like remote viewing.
Okay.
Yeah, of course she does. Why
there was
wouldn't
one
she?
story, and it's a true story, where they were looking for a fugitive, and they thought this guy was in, somewhere down south somewhere, and he was in fact, I think, in Montana. And she was able to say he's by an Indian burial ground, and if you don't get him, he is about to leave. And she was able to describe the campground that was nearby, and that turned out to be exactly right. He was just about to leave when they nabbed him, and they found the things that she had described.
Very cool.
It is cool. It's very cool.
Where I get frustrated with the Colonial Parkway Murders psychics is it's always stuff like, I see woods, I see water.
Of
and
course.
You're like, it's Virginia. Have you been
Virginia,
there?
Yeah.
Right.
Nothing but woods and water.
Well, that's like in Gettysburg with the ghost centers. We're there in 20 degrees and they feel cold spots. Like, yeah, me too.
A lot of them. Some of them are my toes.
Yeah, I don't know if you're as much of a crime fiction aficionado as I am in terms of TV series, but what you were saying about remote viewing reminds me of Fringe. Did you ever watch that?
I loved Fringe.
I love Fringe. That was great.
That was a fabulous series. I loved that one.
It reminds me a lot because you mentioned Medium earlier.
I think they used some of this in Fringe.
In Fringe, yeah.
It's not fiction. Look up. It's the arm. Annie Jacobson was the author. Phenomenon is a book. It's a very thick book, but it's astonishing how this program developed. And there are people out there that when they finally dissolved it, some of the people who were part of it, a man named Joseph McMonigal, would run sessions teaching people how to do it. He's still around. He's written several books about it with illustrations showing these are the things we got. So, I guess maybe I should be more skeptical about it, but they did a lot of controlled and corroborated experiments with it. And that's what I mean. You can corroborate. If a psychic says to you, like I had one tell me this particular ghost had buried some things in water and he wanted me to buy some hip boots to go get it, right? And I said, when you give me the location, I'll buy the boots. Until then, no. Why do we need this elaborate framework? Why don't you just tell me where it is and then I'll go get it? Easy.
Well, they saw woods and they saw water.
Right, exactly. It's always woods and water. Always woods and water, yep.
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. We're back here at Mind Over Murder.
You'd said that you like Fringe. You alluded to Medium earlier, and I know that you've written books about CSI and Criminal Minds and the use of forensic psychology there. When you watch TV series like this, are you able to kind of turn off your training and watch it for enjoyment, or are you constantly scrutinizing, are they getting it right? Are they getting it right?
Well, when I wrote The Forensic Psychology of Criminal Minds, that was a contracted book and they weren't getting it right. And I wrote the book saying, here's the real story of the FBI's behavioral science unit. Here's the real stuff. Because I've worked with some of the early guys. I worked with Ressler and Douglas and some of the first generation and second generation profilers. So the book was really about, here's a case. It's based on this true case. Here's where they twist it. But you know what? They don't have a private plane taking half a dozen profilers here and there.
Jim
they
Clemente.
Don't take over cases. They don't, there's any number of things they don't actually do. And I'll say that in the book. But still, the whole first year was based on actual cases and I knew what the cases were. So I would then say, here's how the case really worked out. It's TV. And I recognize that. But sometimes I can't keep watching. And I can't keep watching that show, particularly.
Do you find yourself throwing socks and other things at the television?
No, I get on the computer and write my own stuff. I just don't do it. Like I think there was another one about a jury consultant, Bull.
Yes.
One episode I was out. This is
Bull, fill in the blank here.
Yeah. Nope.
So, the media is glutted both with crime fiction, but also true crime. Do you feel like the media plays a role, or how much of a role do you think the media plays in perpetuating like misguided theories or untruths about cases?
Well, anytime a production company is making a choice about how to present a story, they are affecting viewers. Mm-hmm. One of the things that bother me about all the serial killer stuff out there is they're doing the same dozen over and over and over.
Right.
Which leads to the idea that, first of all, that serial killer is a type of offender when it isn't. It's just a description of the behavior. Mm-hmm. and that these represent the sum total of serial killers. There's that Wisiati again. Yeah. What you see is all there is. And so then people come to me with these questions thinking, do serial killers do this? Do serial killers do that? Like, we have over 5,000 documented around the world. I can't give you a general response to that because there's so much diversity in these cases and their developmental trajectory, their motivations and their methods. Do they all have a victim type? No. Mm-hmm. There's so many myths perpetuated from the media emphasizing certain types, and they're emphasizing the ones that they know are going to get viewers.
Yes.
That's what they do. They're not going to pick a serial killer to do a documentary on who's boring.
Right.
They're going to do the flashy ones, but they convey the impression that this is the sum total of serial killers. And I get that. I mean, when I start teaching my class, here's 20 things you think you know about serial killers that you don't. But that's mostly it. And it's not just fictional media or documentaries. It's news reporters as well, and fiction writers. Novelists will perpetuate those things from one thing to another. Criminal justice textbooks do as well. There was one time, I know the profiler who made up the statistic that there are 35 to 50 serial killers operating in America at any given time. He made that up to get money from Congress for programs. That shows up. Yes, he did.
No.
He told me he did. That shows up in criminology texts, and I still hear people saying that. Like, that was a total fabrication.
Wow. Okay.
But it crosses over into being a reference point.
Yes. So media definitely influences us into thinking that things are a certain way. And we forget it's an entertainment venue. Mm-hmm. They are making their decisions based on wanting audience share. And they're going to clip stories and simplify stories because they want viewers to have satisfaction at the end. That becomes a problem when viewers don't go look for more information because they tend not to.
Has there ever been a documentary or a show that you've been a part of that once you got involved, you were like, I really don't like the way they're portraying this, or I don't like the
definitely,
message?
But they don't care what I say. I've been a consultant on several shows. Mm-hmm. I was fired off one for telling them they couldn't do a thing with a dead body that they wanted to do. I said, well, that's not the way soil works. That's not the way decomposition works. But I can give you an alternate scenario to help with your plot that would work. No,
they weren't interested.
This is flashier. Wow. And so thanks very much. We don't want you anymore.
Wow.
And did you really get fired?
I did. Yeah.
Wow.
Were there others where you fired?
Or I just wasn't used on the rest of the show.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
It's kind of the same thing, isn't it?
But I gave them a way to do what they wanted to do that would have been scientifically correct, but they decided, no, you can actually, even though a body's been submerged in water, washed by coroners, you can still get a fingerprint off of them. Like, no, not after burial for 20 years. No.
But at the same time, you were offering them a scientific way to move their story forward, and they just weren't having it.
But even the writer of the show wanted to do that. The producers did not.
I suppose you want to throw anybody under the bus by telling us what it was.
No.
You think so, but figure
I still work for people, and I want to be sure.
I noticed you were very circumspect a moment ago, too, when you said this person that created this fictional 35 to 50 serial killers operating in the United States at any given time.
But that being That being said, I do want to give kudos to the team that worked with me on the BTK because, they listened constantly. They didn't always, there were a couple of things I said, please don't use this, and they did. But, out of 4 hours, that's not bad. And they were constantly asking me about different people that we could use, being introduced to them, how to frame this. So there are teams that really are trying to get it right. It's just that when you take the totality of true crime programming, and there have been some great ones, by the way. Take the one, Don't F with Cats. Mm-hmm. So there's another amateur team, right? But they brought in skills that helped them do things that cops not only couldn't do, but wouldn't do. And they were able to assist in a way that you don't ordinarily see. So that's a little different from the whizzy thing that I've talked about with true crime amateurs, because they were amateurs, but they contributed because they had a skill set that was needed in that particular case. And that was a great documentary. Yeah, it's hard to watch, but it was well put together. And so they're out there, but you take the totality of documentaries and true crime and also fictional crime scripted shows, and there's certainly impressions being made that do give the wrong idea, that things are simple, that we can solve these easily, that all we need is genetic, DNA, genealogy.
Right.
We'll be able to solve everything. I've heard people say, serial killers are a thing of the past because
I have
now
too.
Solve everything. They're completely
ludicrous.
wrong about that. And yet I've heard it said by professionals in this field, and they're completely wrong about that.
Well, and you've also got 250,000 cold case homicides to work backwards through.
Exactly.
So we have a lot of work before us.
A lot of work.
By the way, you just mentioned Whizzy. What you see is all there is. Just for the benefit of someone who's listening to this episode who didn't listen to the last episode, explain what you see is all there is again.
Okay, Whizzy is a term coined by the foremost cognitive psychologist, Daniel Kahneman, in his book on our thinking processes, and is a cognitive error that amateur sleuths and police officers, any investigators could be prone to in virtue of the way the human brain operates. But the idea is that you've collected a series of facts about a case, and the feeling is that that's all that they're ever going to be. And so now you have the truth about the case, but you're not open to future discoveries that might shift the narrative, that might change the narrative. And we need to be open. We need to drop the Whizzy idea and keep, even though we think we're building cases well, always be aware that there might be something we don't know that is going to change it dramatically. And we've had cases like that.
A lot of them, actually.
Yeah.
And we're
seeing a lot of that right now with documentaries that are going back to change the narrative. And people, and what we're finding is people who are still stuck on the old narratives refuse to entertain that this could be changed at all. That's Whizzy. That's a problem.
And we all do it in our lives from time to time.
Because permanence is security. It's predictability. It's a sense of control. If I know exactly what happened in a case, no one can change that. I can predict everything about it. I control it. That's our tendency because it makes us feel like we're not sort of thrown into chaos.
There's some degree of comfort and control and understanding of these deep, dark, terrible things that happened.
Right. And for those who have a high need for closure, which that's a personality trait.
Like cops.
Like cops. Well, not all cops, because some don't. But people with high need for closure tend to be attracted to law enforcement types of professions where it's all, feels pretty black and white. They are prone to this, and that becomes a problem because they may chase down leads they're absolutely certain about, and they're wrong. Gut instinct, by the way, this idea that your gut never lies is totally off, totally off. And that is a watchword that cops live by. Gut instinct is just you've come into a familiar scenario, you recognize it bodily and it feels right. So it is right. But that can be to your detriment. It could even lead you to your death if you really trust your gut all the time and think it's never wrong, because it can be wrong.
What you see is all there is, and it's one of the pitfalls that we see in investigations.
Yeah, I kind of wish he would have come up with a better name than that, because like confirmation bias, it kind of says what it is. It's very easy to remember. People get it, but Wizziati, not so much.
No.
I wish he would have, but it's so perfect. You know, I've searched for it for a long time. Like, I talk with cops and they think they have all the facts, and then something comes along and it just throws everything off. I mean, there was a great case. I think might have been Indiana, where cops got called into this double homicide scene of a man, an intruder into a house who had murdered the guy's wife with a hammer that he had picked up off the kitchen table. He'd murdered her with a hammer. So it's the Mark Winger case. So Mark Winger comes in and shoots him and calls the cops, and turns out there was a setup. It was a setup by Mark Winger, because he knew he could get the guy to the house. It's a complicated case, but he knew he could get the guy to the house and then tell that story. And the most experienced cops bought it. He got victim fund money. The rookie questioned it, said, this doesn't make sense that his guard dog was in the garage. It doesn't make sense that he's asking for the pistol back. It doesn't make sense. Let's just look at their phone records. And he was ordered not to do any investigation.
Wow. He was told to stand down.
Finally, his partner, the experienced one, said, all right, I'm just going to sit and listen to you. I think you're totally wrong. You're overthinking, but I'm just going to listen to you. And as the rookie made his case, they started going, oh, you know what?
The kid has
and
something
it turned
here.
out that Mark Winger was, in fact, the murderer of both people.
Wow.
And he was having an affair. So you throw that new fact into things, it changed the case entirely.
What are the big motivators again in murder? It's money, sex, and power, I think, are the three.
Yeah, power, definitely.
Yeah. And
control, power, yeah.
This has at least two of those. And maybe three.
Jeez.
No, probably three, actually. He even got victims.
Got victims funds.
Funding.
Yeah. And life insurance. Yeah.
Gee whiz. If someone, amateur or professional, sets out to investigate a case, what are some of the things that you would caution them about to avoid falling into that trap, the confirmation bias trap, the Wizziati trap? What would you tell people? Here's what you need to do so that you don't fall into that.
Well, there are trainings specifically for police officers that were devised by police officers who've already been down that road. I think any department ought to put those trainings into effect, even though they will get resistance. When I've done police trainings, I get resistance to some of these ideas. But they'll also get some who will listen, and that's what we need, people who will listen and then become mindful of their tendencies. If my tendency is to want to close a case fast, get the answers, be done, not be second guessed, I need somebody to remind me that I'm doing that. Yes, it's got strengths, that approach. It can close cases fast, but it's got weaknesses too. And that person needs to be reminded of the weaknesses. One of the things that they can do is when they approach a case, they'll have a hypothesis going. They should work an alternate hypothesis too, to see how any given fact might be interpreted in a different scenario. So they should always stay open to those possibilities until such time as they get such an abundance of evidence that they know which way they want to go. But even so, you still need to stay open, because a future thing, somebody who broke up with her boyfriend now has new information that never got out there before. And now she's mad and she's going to tell the tale of what she knows. And whoa, is that ever going to make all the difference? We have to always stay open to something new that could happen.
I was going to say, if you are someone like us who have been living with this case for so long that we know every single facet in detail of it, is there a way that we can readjust our thinking to look at all aspects of the case anew? Is there a way to retrain your brain to look at the facts as if it's brand new? Again, I'm curious if there's a way to do it.
you've already been talking about that, because I know Bill was saying, here's how he had always been talking about it. And now in the past year, he's sort of relooked at some of that. I mean, I think it's always good. But what I did when I approached it was looked at several different people's ideas about it. I think I watched the oxygen thing. I read several of the books that have been put out there and thought, which of these things make sense and which of these things have flaws? Like I know one book really hung their case on an FBI profiler who was operating out of 1990s thinking.
Correct.
Which is really old-fashioned. Right. And I thought, right off the bat, okay, yeah, you're kind of wowed by your profiler friend, but you know what? That's stuff that we've moved past.
Yes. And even our investigators have said a lot of assumptions that were made about types of victims and you know, sort of narrowly defining how.
What I said was serial killer is not a type of offender.
Right.
People think that they share all the same traits and, background, and they all had head injuries and abuse and whatnot. And that is far from the truth. We can't even begin to figure out 5,000 people, what they all have in common. One thing, they've killed at least 2 people on 2 different occasions. So that's a behavioral description. But you can have someone who's sexually compelled, so they're addicted to murdering. And that is more the typical serial killer that we see versus someone like, somebody who kills 2 people on 2 separate nights through a robbery. And they're not necessarily going to kill again. Those are the circumstances. They're not addicted to it. There's no real link except that this person killed once and then killed again to get money. Or a spree killer is a different kind of individual than a serial killer. For example, if they murder a family and then they take off on the road and they kill somebody to get a car and then they kill somebody to, so that's very different from a sexually compelled serial killer who's targeting victims and stalking them and looking for some kind of sexual gratification. So there's a lot of different types out there. A repeat offender who I would say does not have the propensity to become a serial killer would be like that idea of Gary Gilmore is a good example. Okay. If you remember back to those days, that's what he did. He wanted money to buy his girlfriend something and he wanted a big shiny truck. He was not going to be able to get that. He just decided to kill somebody to get money, and then he killed somebody else the next night. That's not really serial killer territory, even though he qualifies. Or, for example, an accomplice to a serial killer who does commit several murders under the leveraging of the serial killer. He qualifies, but he doesn't have any of the motivational spectrum of the serial killer. So he or she is a different type of person.
Fascinating.
Although you're saying he or she, although it is true that the vast majority of people that are repeat offenders of this type are male. Is that fair?
Yeah, unless they're in teams, then you have more female participation. And sometimes the female is the leader of the team, and sometimes it's all female teams. There's more females than people realize because, again, that myth out there that there are very few, if any, female serial killers. In fact, there are sexual serial killers who are female. I've heard sexologists say that's not possible, but those are male sexologists. So women know better.
Wow.
Yeah, they're out there. But you have to be in a position to study the cases and see, if you're only watching documentaries on TV or reading a few true crime books, you won't see the variation across this landscape called serial murder.
Somehow I'm still stuck on Thelma and Louise, and it's just not working for me. But it obviously does happen. It has happened, and it will happen again.
Yes.
If I was to, for example, if I was an incoming student to one of your classes, what are the books that you would recommend I, as an incoming student, read other than yours?
Well, it depends on which class you're going to take.
Forensic psychology, let's say.
Well, for example, this year in my graduate class, I'm going to have them read the Caitlin Rother's book on Rebecca Zahau.
Oh, okay.
Because what a bizarre case that is. It's a lot more bizarre than it's been shown.
Is that the Death on Ocean Avenue? Is that
Death on
Ocean Avenue. Okay,
She
I've got that.
She gathered a lot more facts than you typically see. So I'm just going to put it out there for the students to work on and see what they make of the case as a psychological autopsy.
Very cool.
That's an expression, by the way, you've used twice now, which I found fascinating. What's a psychological autopsy mean?
In the cases where a death is ambiguous, now we're talking manner of death is natural accident, suicide, homicide, or undetermined. In the undetermined category, it simply could be that you just don't have enough information or that it's ambiguous and it can go more than one way and you don't really know what to do with it. Psychological factors can sometimes tip the balance toward one or the other. So like a suicide that you think is a suicide could actually be it could be a homicide staged as a suicide. So you have to be pretty proficient at reading behavior at the scene. So that's psychological. A psychological autopsy would often look a lot more deeply into victimology than police officers will do, and using what experts know clinically about people in terms of the questioning of relatives and friends and associates of this person, their mental state. We're looking at, trying to figure out what could have happened here, what's more likely to have happened here, so that the coroner or medical examiner can make the determination.
That's really fascinating. So you're going to have your students read that one, Death on Ocean Avenue.
Mm-hmm. I will also have them read The Psychopath Whisperer by Kent Keel, who's one of the world's leading experts on psychopaths and the neuroscience behind it. He takes his traveling MRI machine into prisons to show us, and has shown us, that the psychopath's brain is different. So his book goes into how did that develop? What is a psychopath? How do you work with psychopaths, etc. So I'm having them read that, or I might have them read something from Robert Hare, also another psychopath expert. I think the one on Ted Bundy I have used often, Al Carlisle's the report that he did when he was the Utah prison psychologist, and he was tasked with deciding if Bundy, and this is before they knew who Bundy was, they had grabbed him for burglary and attempted abduction, and Carlisle was tasked with deciding whether he might be a future danger. So he went around talking to people and compiling a report for the court and said, I think this guy's a liar, quite the manipulator. Even though I really like him, he's quite the manipulator. And I think, so he published part of his report, and I often will use that in my classes for students to see an assessment on someone that they recognize before anyone knew he was a serial killer. That's a great book. I like that one.
Wow. Oh, that's Al Carlisle.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right, we're going to just put together a little Dr. Ramsland recommends reading list here. We're going to put it up on our Facebook page. This is awesome. To wrap up, go ahead and just remind us the name of your upcoming book, about your new series. Tell us a little bit about that. And then what is your most recent book that people can get from, say, Barnes & Noble or Amazon?
The most recent book is How to Catch a Killer, which came out in 2020, and that's 30 cases of the capture of serial killers and how it was done. And then the series is the Nutcrackers series, because they take on hard nuts to crack. That's my Annie Hunter series.
Uh-huh.
The first one will be out in August, Ice Cream Man. I Scream Man. And that is about human trafficking in a juvenile detention facility by sadistic, corrupt politicians.
And this is you transitioning over to fictional work based,
although
of course,
I
on
always use actual cases. And I put my fictional twist to it. But yeah, Annie Hunter is, I guess, my alter personality.
I would say
He's a forensic psychologist who runs an investigation agency out of the Outer Banks, North Carolina.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been a thrill for both of us. We really, really enjoyed talking to you today.
Me too. I can't wait to see you guys in Savannah.
Yes, we are very, very much looking forward to it.
We'll look forward to it. Thank you so much.
Right. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
That's going to do it for this episode of Mind Over Murder. We'll see you next time.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawlspace Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.